Episode 4 champions. We're getting there. We're getting through. Varis is up. I'm going to have to eat my words a little bit on Varis, I think. Initially, I thought it was going to be really useful and potentially a sort of sleeper. But since realizing that other commanders have a greater area of effect that just isn't mentioned in their skill description, and since he has a max or a cap on the targets that are able to be affected, it sort of reduces how high I would rank him. As I've said all the way along, though, this isn't about rankings, it's about what he can do. So rage cost of 800 with the skill damage coefficient of 600 isn't the best ratio. When you take into account 3 targets, it's much nicer. Enfeeble and Grudge are both really good effects, but they only apply to the current target, not all 3, which is something, again, I missed initially. Now, if you're fighting in a large-scale battle, he's already losing out by not being able to hit all targets in his area of effect. And then when you couple that with the current target effect for Enfeeble, I'm just not sure how effective he's going to be in that particular situation. However, if he's in a smaller scale combat, perhaps at the armory or springs or outposts, then he's really got some good effects, and he still does the AoE. So I think he's somebody to consider in a situational sense, and possibly for some of your team members that maybe are better suited to hanging around those points and defending rather than being in and amongst the major battles. He's got a spear attack increase of 150%, so yes, it's only one stat increase, but it is the most effective or most sought after. Melisandre. I'm again questioning my initial evaluation, but I think Melisandre stood up to it a little bit better. So 800 rage cost, damage coefficient of 400, which isn't a high ratio, but she has a bleed for 300 per second for 4 seconds. So when you take that into account, she does have a reasonably high ratio and damage. She is again a max of 3 targets, so perhaps not so suited to the large scale combat that I thought she might be. But she is a bow attack increase. Now, if you're going to be running a bow team, once again, you're likely not going to have your Lord. You're going to need that bow attack in there. So, if you run a team full bow, and I know a lot of people say never go full bow, but in this mode, I think it's possibly a really good option if you do it right. If you don't, you're going to notice the lack of stats, and it's just going to confirm your own fears that, oh, these guys aren't going to, do the job and stand up. As far as RH goes, we've actually had a nearly complete bow user, top damage both times. So, as much as I was disbelieving at first, it is a good option if you can play it right. Now, he's particularly good at keeping out of damage range and keeping his damage continuous, and I think that's the key. While other teams have to move away and maneuver around the enemy a lot more or back in, back out, if you can get to a spot where you can just sit and lay on the damage, it just stacks up really high. So, all in all, maybe not the best, but like with any, used correctly, could be a really good champ. Feast or Feist, I'm not sure why I want to say it that way, but I have a feeling it's to do with an old fantasy novel or series. So rage cost of 650, 800 damage coefficient. He's a much better ratio than somebody like Varis, even when you take into consideration the 3. He's got a increase to the attack of your infantry by 150%, cannot stack. As discussed, that applies to all your allies, and that's why the stack ability is noted. Also grants tenacious status, reducing attack damage taken by 30%, which lasts for 4 seconds. So that's a nice one. Once again, it's a direct reduction of after the coefficient has been applied. So it's going to be reasonably significant. He's also got infantry attack increase of 150% and infantry defense increase of 150%. Now, while defense, as always, isn't the most sought after, if you're going to have it on anyone, it's probably a good idea to have it on infantry since their natural stat is quite high in defense. Whether he stands up to somebody like Chris is pretty debatable. Um, and for that reason, he maybe doesn't earn himself a spot. But in the same way as Andrea, he does give stats. And if you're going to be a heavy tank, and if you're going to fulfill that role, and that's your chosen task for the team, then he's still got potential. He's gonna be able to tank a fair amount, and he does do skill damage, which comparative to Andrea isn't in her skill set. Uh, Health, yeah, sure, it would be nice, but I don't think it's really necessary considering other stat increases that you get from other skills. So this episode really does seem to be a sort of presentation on my previously possible poor judgment. I'm not saying that Kravis isn't good or any of the others. Once again, they have their uses in the right situation. Passive increase to the bow attack of 150%, so he does tick that box, which means he is usable in team. And regardless of the skill damage, he's got hesitation, which is an excellent skill. 75% chance to mitigate skill casting on the enemy. So your range is high, and that means the potential to launch skills from afar is quite high also. If you're targeting the right team and laying on the damage with your bows, as well as applying an effect like that, you can potentially mitigate a lot of damage to your main teams that are in and amongst the battle, while still laying on the damage and taking out some of their supporters, particularly against an Annie team or another bow team. It's possibly a really good option actually. So maybe I'm being a little too harsh, and maybe the last couple got me down a little bit. I'm going to stick with Kravis. I think he does have his use and he is useful. He's almost certainly going to make my bow team, probably even more so or over someone like Sansa. I don't plan to be taking hits. That may be a little bit optimistic, but I would much rather be able to target and mitigate than sustain and take hits. If I get caught, I get caught. I'll just respawn, come back, and try again. And that's not necessarily perhaps the best viewpoint to take. It does take a while to get around the map, so you're going to lose out on that damage, which isn't what the bow team's designed to do, but it is what it is. Theon's the saving grace for me here. I really don't have to change anything about my initial evaluation. After 3 seconds, creates an AoE damage region at the target location lasting 4 seconds. This reduces the attack, defense, and health of all enemies in range. A max of 5, but it's by 150%, so quite large. It can't stack, and it also inflicts Fear of War with a 100% guarantee, unless, of course, they've already got an immunity in effect. Now, Fear of War means that they can't do normal attacks or counters for the duration, which is really useful. If you do get 5 people, which isn't hard to do in a major combat situation, then that's 5 that aren't attacking whatsoever the entire time. They can use skills still, but since they're not attacking, it's much harder for them to build their rage and use those skills. So it not only delays their skills, it mitigates all damage for that time from those targets, while reducing their stats, enabling your guys to lay some real damage on. I think all round it's potentially one of the most useful skills for a supportish role champion. So he's got bow health, bow defense, and total attack increase 150% for the first two and 75 on the total attack. Total attack is really nice, and some people would look at that as a big advantage. I'd actually rather see him have 150% bow attack because I'd like to use him in the long range team, keeping him out of
Mm-hmm.
trouble and putting the bow stats to some sort of use. considering it is total, I'd actually think about using him in another team, perhaps a spear. But I'm not sure on that yet. I have to have more of a think. I'll get back to you. All right, so that's episode 4. Only one installment left. We do still have this gift code giveaway going on. I'd really like to reward people for getting involved and having discussions, so please do comment with your kingdom, your name, and a little something something to let me know that you've actually watched and had a good think about what's being said. Cheers, guys. Have a good one.